Abby, please just...
Maybe I can come in.
Were you a fan of the long-running TV show Lost? Did you wish Lost had more of an overt horror kind of feel to it? If the answer is yes, then you may want to check out From. It actually has some of the same producers as Lost and has a very similar film. And even one of its stars, Harold Perrineau, was featured both in From and Lost. Now, I have to say before I go any further, I think this show isn't helped by its incredibly generic title, which doesn't give you really any idea about what this kind of show is actually about, and as such I think it has flown under the radar for many people. It's just finished its second season, I believe, and to be honest, it was recommended to me by my brother, and I hadn't kind of really seen much about it. I'd kind of heard that sort of it mentioned a couple of times. So I've just watched season 1, I've yet to watch season 2, so I thought I would give my thoughts as I was speaking to a couple of other people who are kind of like horror YouTubers, and they hadn't heard of it either. So we'll talk about season 1. I will this will be a non-spoiler review, although I'll kind of sort of give some vague idea about what's kind of the story. Now, it focuses on an ensemble cast who are in this kind of strange sort of out of the way town. It's a Canadian production, but where this place is no one knows, and that's the kind of the part of the premise here, is that there seems to be this kind of this small town which is cut off from any type of outside world. So people come through, people come through any direction in America. It is set in America, despite being Canadian. And so you could be driving in New York, you could be driving in Texas, Ohio, and you'll come across this kind of downed tree, and this will kind of push you into this kind of small little town. It will kind of redirect you, and you end up in this kind of small town. But then you can't escape. You go along the road, and you sort of loop basically. So once you enter this town, ultimately you kind of can't escape. But that's not the main problem. The main problem, among many, is that during the night there seems to be this group of what's referred to as monsters, but they seem to be these kind of people that look like they could have stepped out of the 1950s, that only ever come out at night, and ultimately if you could have let them in your house, they'll turn into a monster and kind of kill you. And there's various kind of things that you can do to prevent this from happening. And the story primarily follows Harold Perrineau's character, who is kind of the sheriff of this town, who is already there. And then we have these new arrivals that are kind of a family that end up there, and this other guy who kind of comes in, and they're the kind of the new arrivals, and they kind of end up in this town and then can't escape. And we as the audience are sort of finding out what's happening with these kind of new arrivals. And ultimately, it's kind of 2 parts Lost, 1 part kind of Salem's Lot, is the best way I would kind of describe this. And we have a variety of kind of supernatural kind of based problems that seem to arise. So the first season comprises of 10 episodes, kind of like, 45 minutes, 50 minutes long each episode. So let's talk about what I think works in this series' favour. Okay, so it's very similar to Lost, and Lost, was a big show for a long time, and it's been off the air for a while, but it was one of these kind of shows that was one of these big talking points, and it's a very, very similar show. I mean, you can boil it down to a group of strangers that end up on a kind of a remote location and have to deal with a bunch of kind of surreal and strange problems. It's both shows. Like I said, this one has more of a horror twist, but as the series goes on, there's more questions and kind of more sort of supernatural stuff, ghostly figures, strange kind of symbols, mysterious kind of spiders, all sorts of stuff that is teleporting trees. There's loads of stuff that kind of is sort of going on. So, it's certainly a mystery. If you like a kind of a mystery kind of show, or even movies, you might like this one. I think it's bolstered by, for the most part, a strong cast with good characterization. The cast is quite expansive, but it focuses mainly on, a certain kind of group of characters. And I have to say, I think they're all kind of quite well drawn. And, we get a variety of different kind of personalities. And then it wisely kind of focuses on these kind of new arrivals. So we are experiencing, as the viewers, what is unfolding along with these kind of characters who are just introduced to this kind of this setting. And so, some of the things that are introduced, I like that they kind of didn't go the typical route with them. For example, this particular kind of town, we actually have two sort of factions of people. You have the people who live in the towns kind of area, who are much more adherent to kind of rules and regulations. And then there's this kind of large kind of stately manor, and in there there's a bit more kind of hedonistic. But it could have been quite easy in having inflated drama to have these two almost kind of like at odds with one another. They would be rivals. And they are mildly, but they generally do work along. So I thought, oh, you know what, it's an easy kind of sidestep. You have this slightly different point of views from both of the kind of the communities, but they ultimately still come together as kind of one people when it comes down to it. So I like some of the kind of like it didn't take the easy route with kind of some of these kind of like setups for different people and things like that. We actually get some overt horror here, and I have to say it does skew more adult. There's some fairly kind of graphic gore. I mean, when people get killed, they get eviscerated. And we get some decent kind of prosthetic effects in regards to these kind of like mutilated bodies and things like that, and the actual monsters themselves look genuinely kind of quite creepy. They're all kind of wandering around in their kind of human looking form until they attack, when they become much more kind of monstrous. But it's genuinely quite creepy, and that gives me that kind of Salem's Lot kind of vibe. So I did enjoy this. I think this location and this set that they've kind of created, apparently this kind of town was more or less created as a set specifically for this kind of show, and it really does look like a rundown kind of dilapidated place with lots of kind of like intricacies and kind of interesting things kind of about it. And I don't want to go too much into kind of the ins and outs of it, but every episode I think ultimately kind of asks more questions and introduces more kind of layers. And we do have like a few different kind of ideas about how people are trying to kind of escape and things like this. But it really does follow the kind of the template laid down by Lost. For better or for worse, I mean, we have to remember that Lost ultimately did kind of somewhat kind of fall off a cliff on its own. So I do hope that the showrunners here have an idea about where it's kind of going, and it's not going to be like spinning its wheels like Lost did. I think the pacing for most episodes is fairly strong. There are one or two episodes where I felt it didn't really kind of move the needle. I think, for example, episodes, I think it was like 6, I found quite kind of like, there was nothing really happened in that episode. There are a couple of ones where I do feel it's kind of, just kind of a little bit of filler. But a lot of episodes do have quite a lot kind of, revealed and things like that. I thought the characters are quite good, the acting's kind of fairly strong, and the way it's filmed, you do feel like you're in this kind of cut off area. And yeah, they've got swearing in it, we even get to a few kind of sex scenes and things like that, so it does skew a little bit more adult. I mean, again, another kind of similar comparison might be the kind of the Midnight Mass show as well. What doesn't work, now, like Lost, I think this movie asks a lot of questions and keeps asking them and doesn't really provide much in the way of answers, at least in season 1. In actual fact, I feel there's practically no answers given in season 1, which I think might be a bit frustrating. I think, it maybe sticks a little bit too closely to the formula that was kind of, popularised in the show Lost. And we all watched that because we kind of wanted to know what was going on. We wanted to know, what all these mysteries meant. And I think the problem is when it keeps on asking loads of different questions and keeps presenting us with, oh, there seems to be ghostly voices. There's this ghost of this kind of little boy. People seem to be having kind of visions, and people seem to be getting like weird messages in their arms and things. All these things keep kind of like adding to it. Thinking, you know, I think that it needs to have a little bit more kind of answers peppered a bit. Maybe not everything, but I do feel it kind of has to have a little bit more kind of going, you know, sort of giving you, not just kind of asking you loads and loads of questions. Each episode, more and more, the mystery kind of deepens, and I think it can be a little frustrating. There are one or two kind of day players, smaller characters who I didn't think the acting was quite as strong, and you know, I think some of the way these characters are written as well. Some characters seem a little bit too passive in regards to what they are doing. I would say the first half of the season is stronger than the second half. The second half, I feel, feels a little bit more fillery. There are a couple of good episodes, but I would say for the most part, the first 5 episodes of this show are very strong. And then this 6th episode ends up being quite weak, whilst the 7th is, you know, a bit of a return to form. But then it doesn't quite, I feel, grasp me quite as much as the first half of the season. So overall, I think this is a good show, and I would certainly be intrigued to watch the second season. But as it ended, it was pretty good, but I don't really feel like you kind of understand what this actually is all about at all. You know, you're kind of watching, thinking, I'm watching this, and I don't really know what's kind of going on. And as such, it kind of makes it not quite as gripping for me, at least, because you're just watching a bunch of kind of random things happen without any real explanation. And I think they should have had maybe at least answered half these questions they've answered, and not just nothing. So I would suggest this series is probably a 7 out of 10. It's worth a watch, and it's hard to really sort of say how good the show is in total until I've watched the second season, and if it goes beyond that as well. But it's a 7 out of 10. I do feel it's an intriguing mystery. There's some good horror elements. There's some pretty good, decent effects. Good performances. I don't think the writing is quite as strong. It's a little bit too similar to Lost. But we'll see where it goes. Yeah, I'm kind of... I would recommend this one, but be prepared not to be completely satisfied with watching it, because it doesn't really explain anything. It's in the first season. So it's a 7 out of 10. Has anyone else seen this? Please do let me know, and do leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.